I learned that night how quiet cruelty can be. No shouting, no fists, just a locked door, a watching window, and the sound of rain doing what they refuse to do. Touch me. I was 8 months pregnant when my husband decided I didn't belong in my own house. The storm had been gathering all afternoon. Heavy. Intentional. The kind of sky that doesn't threaten. It promises. By the time night fell, the rain was coming down in sheets, slamming against the driveway, the windows, my skin. I stood barefoot on the stone steps, my dress soaked through, clinging to my legs like it was trying to drag me down. I knocked once, then again. Then I stopped knocking and started begging. I don't like remembering that part. The sound of my own voice breaking apart in the dark. The way desperation strips you of dignity faster than any hand ever could. Inside the house, the lights were on. Warm, yellow, safe. And behind the glass door, I could see them. My husband stood there first, arms crossed, jaw tight, not angry. Worse, resolved. Beside him, his mother sat calmly in her high-backed chair, hands folded in her lap like she was watching a program she'd already seen before. They didn't argue. They didn't shout back. They didn't move. They just watched. Rain ran into my eyes, my mouth. I tasted metal and salt and something like shame. My hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the understanding settling into my bones. This wasn't a fight. This was a decision. Please, I said. I remember that word clearly. I used it too many times. Please let me in. Please, I'm cold. Please, I'm pregnant. Please, this is my home. My husband finally stepped closer to the door. For half a second, I thought he might open it. That instinct, that old habit of hoping, rose up before I could kill it. He leaned forward instead, close enough that I could see his mouth move through the glass. "You should think about what you did," he said. I stared at him. Rain blurred his face, but not enough to hide the certainty in his eyes. "What I did?" My voice cracked. "I asked you not to lie to me. That's what I did." His mother stood then, slow, careful, like she had all the time in the world. "You embarrassed him," she said, loud enough for me to hear through the door. "A good wife doesn't do that." A good wife. I almost laughed. The sound caught in my throat and turned into something ugly instead. Lightning split the sky. For a moment, the whole world went white. And in that flash, I saw myself reflected in the glass. Hair plastered to my face, belly heavy and undeniable, eyes wide with something that looked too much like fear. I didn't recognize her. That was the first death. The power flickered inside the house. Once, twice. Then the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the windows. Their silhouettes vanished. I was alone. The rain intensified, as if the sky approved. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the cold stone, arms wrapped around my stomach, rocking without realizing it. The baby shifted inside me, alive, insistent, innocent. I pressed my forehead to the door and closed my eyes. I told myself to be still, to breathe, to survive the night. I didn't know yet that survival was already on its way. Headlights cut through the rain like a blade. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. The storm had a way of distorting distance, of making everything feel unreal. But the sound came next, the low, steady purr of an engine that didn't belong to this neighborhood. A black car slowed at the curb. The door opened. And then I heard my name. Not shouted, not panicked, certain. I turned my head slowly, every muscle protesting, every instinct wary. He stood there in the rain like it didn't dare touch him. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat already soaked, dark hair plastered back, eyes sharp and locked on me like nothing else existed. He took in the scene in a single glance. The locked door, the lights out, my condition, my position on the ground. Something dangerous flickered across his face. He crossed the distance to me in long strides and dropped to one knee without hesitation, his coat hitting the wet stone. "What happened?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That was the second death. The moment my voice finally failed me. He didn't push. He didn't ask again. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders instead, firm and final, like this was not a request. "You're freezing," he said. Statement. Not concern, not pity. I looked up at him then. Really looked. He was the only man who had ever sworn to protect me without conditions. The one person my husband hated because he couldn't control him. The one who had walked away years ago when he realized the family I married into was rotten at the core. The one they never thought would come back. "How did you—" I started. "I got the message," he said. "The one you didn't mean to send." My phone. Somewhere in my bag. A half-typed text. A pocket dial. A last instinct reaching for someone who once meant safety. He helped me to my feet carefully, one hand steady at my elbow, the other braced protectively near my belly without touching it, until I nodded permission. Then he turned toward the house. I followed his gaze. The door was still locked, the house still dark. He didn't knock. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Get in the car," he said to me. "I'll handle the rest." Something in his tone told me not to argue. Not because I was weak, but because whatever he was about to do didn't require my participation. I hesitated only long enough to look back at the house one last time. Goodbye, I thought. Not to the place, but to the woman who believed love would save her. The rain soaked us both as he opened the passenger door and helped me inside. The warmth hit my skin and made me gasp. My hands were numb, my legs barely worked. He shut the door gently, like I was something valuable. Then he walked back into the storm. I didn't see what he did at the house. I didn't hear raised voices or breaking glass. I only saw him return minutes later, rain dripping from his hair, expression calm again. "Done," he said. The car pulled away from the curb, tires slicing through water, the house disappearing behind us like it had never existed at all. As the streetlights blurred past, exhaustion finally claimed me. The last thing I felt before sleep took me was his hand resting flat on the dashboard, close enough to ground me, far enough to respect me. That night, something was reborn in the rain. Not revenge, not yet. Something colder, stronger. And when I opened my eyes days later, far from that house, wrapped in clean sheets with my body finally warm, they still thought I was broken. That was their last mistake. I woke up 3 days later. Not because my body was ready, because my mind was. Light filtered in through linen curtains. Pale, clean, intentional. The kind of light that belongs to places where people don't scream or beg or get left outside to make a point. For a moment, I didn't move. I took inventory instead. Warmth, silence, no rain. My hand went to my stomach on instinct. The baby moved. Slow, deliberate, alive, steady. Only then did I let myself breathe. The room was unfamiliar but not hostile. White walls, dark wood floors. A chair placed near the bed like someone had thought ahead. A glass of water on the nightstand. Not hotel water. Real water. Fresh. I turned my head. He was sitting in the chair. Not sleeping. Not watching me like a guard. Just there. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, gaze lowered like he'd been thinking about something that required discipline. He felt me stir before I spoke. He always had that instinct. "You're awake," he said. Not a question. My throat was dry. "How long?" "Long enough." I pushed myself up slowly. My body complained, but it obeyed. That mattered. Pain I could manage. Helplessness was something else entirely. "Where am I?" "Safe." Again. Not a promise. A fact. I studied him more carefully now. The lines around his eyes were sharper than I remembered. Not age, responsibility, the kind you earn by not looking away when things get ugly. "You didn't have to come," I said. He lifted his head then. Finally met my eyes. "Yes," he said. I did. Silence stretched between us. Not awkward, measured. "What happened after—" I gestured vaguely, unwilling to say the night out loud. "They'll be without power for a while," he said. "Long enough to think." I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. "What about my husband?" I asked. A pause. barely there. He signed something. I laughed. It surprised both of us. The sound came out flat, humorless. He always did love paperwork when it benefited him. He didn't read it closely. That made me smile. The first real one in months. Of course he didn't. He stood then and crossed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to let more light in. Outside, I caught a glimpse of water. Gray-blue. Calm. "Where are we?" I asked. "Far enough." I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor was cool beneath my feet. Grounding. I liked that. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked different. Not healthier, not glowing, just stripped down to essentials. No makeup, no jewelry, no performance. My eyes were sharper, my face quieter, like something had burned away and left only bone and intention behind. I turned back to him. "They'll come looking." "Yes." "And you brought me anyway." "Yes." I held his gaze. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He weighed the truth first. That was another thing I'd always respected about him. "Because they don't get to decide how this ends," he said, "and because you're done asking for mercy." I felt that settle in my chest. Heavy. "Right." "I didn't ask you to save me," I said. "No," he agreed. "You asked not to be alone." I swallowed. That was true. He moved toward the door. "There's soup. You should eat." "I'm not fragile," I said automatically. "I know," he replied, "but you're rebuilding. That still requires fuel." I followed him into the kitchen. It wasn't large. It wasn't extravagant. It was deliberate. Everything in its place. Clean lines, sharp knives, no clutter masquerading as warmth. He poured soup into a bowl and set it in front of me without ceremony. We ate in silence. Halfway through, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't angry. Not yet. The rage everyone expects, the screaming, shaking, cursing kind, never came. What I felt instead was cold clarity. Like a room had been swept clean, and now I could finally see where everything belonged. That should have scared me. It didn't. "Tell me what you want," he said suddenly. I looked up. "What?" "What happens next?" he clarified. "You don't get pushed anymore. Not by them, not by me. So tell me." I considered the question carefully. "I want my name back," I said finally. He nodded. "I want my body respected," I continued. "My time, my work, my decisions." Another nod. "And I want them to understand," I finished, "that what they did has consequences that don't fade when the lights come back on." A pause. "That's not revenge," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's education?" That earned me a look. Sharp, appraising. "Slow," I added. "Calculated. Boring enough to be unstoppable." He leaned back slightly. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. That night killed the version of me that needed permission. Outside, the water moved gently. Unbothered, patient. He stood and reached into a drawer, sliding a folder across the counter toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Everything they think they control." I opened it. Accounts, properties, documents, timelines. My husband's signature stared back at me from the page. "You planned this," I said quietly. "I prepared for it," he corrected. "There's a difference." I closed the folder. "Good," I said, "because I'm not interested in chaos." He smiled then. "Just slightly?" "Neither am I." That was when I understood. The storm hadn't been the beginning. It had been the door. And I had walked through it barefoot, bleeding and awake. They still thought I was someone to be managed. What they didn't know, what they would learn slowly, painfully, and in full daylight, was that I had learned how to live without warmth. And once you do that, cold becomes a weapon. Cold does something useful when you stop fighting it. It sharpens you. By the fourth morning, my body had settled into itself again. The swelling in my feet eased. My appetite returned, cautious but real. The baby's movements grew stronger, less startled, more assertive, like it understood that the environment had changed. I sat at the table with the folder open in front of me while he made coffee. Not our table. Mine. That distinction mattered now. The documents were clean, organized, brutal in their simplicity. My husband had always liked to feel clever. He'd worn intelligence like a badge, liked to remind people, especially me, that he was the one who understood how things worked. Money, contracts, systems. What he'd never understood was architecture, not buildings, control. "You didn't take everything," I said, scanning the pages again. "No," he replied. "I took leverage." I looked up. "Explain." He set the mug down across from me, untouched. "You don't collapse a structure if you want it to hold the weight of consequences. You remove the load-bearing pieces one by one, quietly." That fit. Too well. "These accounts," I said, tapping a page, "they're joint." "Yes." "But the properties? Not anymore." I closed the folder slowly. "And my mother-in-law?" His jaw tightened just enough to notice. "She's the hinge." I exhaled through my nose. Of course she is. That woman had always been the hinge, the quiet authority. The final word spoken softly and obeyed immediately. My husband deferred to her without ever admitting it. Their power lived in proximity, standing together, reinforcing each other's version of reality until dissent felt irrational. They hadn't expected to lose the house. They hadn't expected to lose me. "What happens when they realize?" I asked. "They already have," he said. "They just don't know how much yet." Right on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before picking it up. Husband. I didn't answer. It buzzed again and again. I let it ring out each time. When the screen finally went dark, something inside me settled. Not relief. Resolution. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," I cut in, "but I want to." I dialed back. I didn't speak when he answered. I let the silence do the work. "Where are you?" he demanded. No concern, no apology, just entitlement dressed as urgency. I leaned back in the chair. "Safe." "You took the money," he said. "I reclaimed access," I corrected calmly. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. My voice didn't rise. "You locked me out of my home, pregnant, in a storm. That's a choice you don't undo with outrage." There it was, breathing, sharp, unmasked. "You embarrassed me," he snapped, "in front of my mother." I almost smiled. "Interesting," I said, "that you think that's the injury." He scoffed. "You've always been dramatic." "No," I said, "I've been accommodating." Silence on the line. I imagined his face tightening, the way it used to when a narrative slipped out of his control. "You need to come back," he said finally. "We'll talk this through like adults." I looked at him, at the man who had planned my obedience so carefully he thought it was permanent. "No," I said, "we're done with private conversations." "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that from now on, everything happens in writing, through counsel, with witnesses. You're overreacting." I let the word hang there. Then I ended the call. My hand didn't shake. "That was clean," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to be kind," I replied. "I was being precise." The rest of the day passed in deliberate motion. We drafted notices, updated records, redirected mail. Each task stripped away another assumption they'd made about my dependence. I didn't rush. I didn't spiral. I learned something important that day. They didn't own me because they were stronger. They owned me because I had once believed peace was worth more than power. That belief was gone now. In the evening, as the light softened and the water outside turned silver, I stood at the window and rested my hands on my belly. "I won't raise a child inside a lie," I said. He joined me, standing beside, not behind me. "You won't," he agreed. "I'm not disappearing," I continued. "I'm not hiding. I'm not running." He waited. "I'm restructuring," I finished. That earned a real smile this time. Not approval, recognition. "They'll escalate," he said. "People like them always do." "I know," I replied. "They mistake access for authority." I turned back to the room, to the documents, to the quiet. "They threw me into a storm," I said. "But storms teach you patterns, pressure systems, timing." He nodded once. "And lightning," I added softly, "doesn't strike randomly." Outside, the sky darkened, but this time there was no rain. Only anticipation. They waited 48 hours. That was their mistake. People like them always believe silence is pressure. They think if they withdraw long enough, you'll panic. You'll reach out. You'll apologize just to restore the illusion of normal. I didn't. I slept. I ate. I read documents like they were maps instead of threats. I walked slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of my body and the life inside it, grounding myself in gravity and consequence. On the third morning, the call came from her. My mother-in-law never wasted moves. I let it ring twice before answering. "Where is my son's wife?" she asked. Not my name, not concern, a title she believed she owned. "I'm right here," I said. "You can speak to me directly." A pause. She hadn't expected that. "You've caused a great deal of confusion," she said coolly. "This situation has gotten out of hand." I leaned back against the counter. "No, it's finally in hand." Her breath sharpened. "You're being influenced." "By reality," I replied. "You're emotional," she pressed. "This isn't the time to make decisions." "I didn't make them in the heat," I said. "I made them in the cold. That's the difference." Silence, then the shift, the softer tone, the one she used when she wanted compliance dressed as compassion. "You're pregnant," she said. "You should be thinking about stability." "I am," I said. "That's why I left." "You embarrassed the family," she said. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" There it was, the true concern. "I was locked out of my home in a storm," I said evenly. "Pregnant. That's how it looks." "That was a misunderstanding." "No," I said. "That was a message, and I received it." Her voice hardened. "You're making enemies." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No," I corrected. "I'm naming them." She exhaled sharply. "You will regret this." I thought of the rain, the door, the glass between us. "No," I said again. "You will." I ended the call. For 10 minutes after, my phone stayed silent. Then the messages started. From him, from her, from extended family members who had never once asked how I was, but suddenly felt entitled to commentary, concern, confusion, thinly veiled threats disguised as worry. I didn't respond. That afternoon, the first letter arrived. Legal letterhead, aggressive tone, empty spine. He read it once, then handed it to me. "They're asserting rights they don't have," he said. "Trying to scare you?" "It's sloppy," I observed. "Yes," he agreed. "That means they're rattled." I traced the edge of the page with my finger. "They think I'll fold." "They don't know you anymore." "No," I said. "They only know the version that needed peace." That evening I felt the baby kick hard enough to make me stop mid-step. I pressed a hand to my stomach. "We're almost there," I murmured. Not to the birth, to something else. Later, as dusk crept in, he spoke without looking up from his laptop. "They're going to escalate next." "I know," I said. "Personal attacks, character assassination. They'll question your mental state." I nodded. They always confuse obedience with sanity. He finally looked at me. "Are you ready for that?" I met his gaze without blinking. I was ready the night they locked the door. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Not close. Yet. They had thrown me into the storm and expected me to drown. Instead, I had learned something far more dangerous. I had learned how to wait. And when lightning waits, it chooses where to strike. They didn't come for me directly. That was their second mistake. They went around me instead, through whispers, through implication, through carefully planted concern. That's how people like them fight when they're afraid of leaving fingerprints. It started quietly. A call from an old acquaintance who hadn't spoken to me in years. A message from a cousin asking if I was feeling supported. An email from someone I barely knew suggesting I get rest and focus on the baby. Concern is a useful disguise. It lets cruelty walk right up to you without raising alarms. By the end of the week, the narrative had formed. I was unstable. I was overwhelmed. I had run off during pregnancy and taken money I didn't understand. He read the messages as they came in, didn't comment, just watched my face. "They're building a case," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "They're preparing to question my credibility." And your fitness, he added, as a mother. That one landed harder. I didn't flinch, but I felt it. A deep, ancient reflex clawed at my ribs. The instinct to defend, to explain, to prove. I let it pass. They won't win that, I said. They don't know what I've documented. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. Medical records, photographs, time-stamped messages, security footage from the neighborhood, the night, the storm, the locked door. He exhaled slowly. You kept everything. I stopped trusting memory years ago, I said. I started trusting evidence. That afternoon, my husband made his move. Not to me, to the court. Emergency filing, allegations of emotional instability, a request for temporary protection of assets and unborn child. I read the document once, then I closed it. They think urgency creates authority, I said. They're wrong, he replied, but we need to respond, carefully. I nodded, not defensively. No, he agreed, decisively. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, from clarity. My mind moved in straight lines now. No loops, no panic. At 3 a.m, I stood at the window, one hand on my belly, watching the water outside shift with the tide. I'm not fighting to keep him away, I said quietly. He looked up from his notes. I know. I'm fighting to make sure he never has the chance to do to this child what he did to me. That earned a long silence. Then, that's a different war? Yes, I said, and I intend to win it without theatrics. The next morning, we filed our response. Not emotional, not reactive, methodical. We didn't deny, I contextualized. I described the marriage without adjectives. I described the night without embellishment. I described the aftermath without accusation. Facts only. And then we attached the evidence. By noon, the whispers changed tone. By evening, the calls slowed. By the next day, my mother-in-law stopped calling altogether. She's recalibrating, he said. That's what predators do when the prey doesn't behave as expected. They still think I'm cornered, I replied. They just haven't realized the trap closed behind them. That afternoon, I felt the baby move again, stronger this time, insistent. I smiled to myself. Good, I whispered. You're learning too. They had tried to erase me with a story. What they didn't understand was this. I had stopped needing to be believed. I only needed to be documented. And once truth is documented, it doesn't raise its voice. It waits. They stopped pretending after that. The concern dried up. The gentle inquiries vanished. What replaced them was far more honest. Force. It arrived in the form of a visit. Unannounced, uninvited, predictable. I was sitting at the table reviewing a revised timeline when he looked up from his phone. They're here, he said. Not he, they. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't rush. I folded the page I was reading and placed it neatly on the stack. Do not open the door, he added. I won't, I said, but I'll listen. Footsteps approached, measured, confident, the kind of steps that assume access. Then the knock, firm, authoritative, practiced. My husband's voice followed immediately, raised just enough to carry. We need to talk. I stayed seated. You can't keep running, he continued. This is getting out of control. Interesting choice of words, from the man who had locked a pregnant woman outside in a storm. His mother joined in next, close to him, always close. This doesn't have to be ugly, she said, but if you force it to be, we will respond accordingly. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands over my stomach. They waited, knocked again, harder this time. I stood, walked to the door, and stopped just short of opening it. You're on private property, I said calmly through the door. This visit is unwelcome. Please leave. Silence, then a sharp inhale from her. Controlled fury. You don't get to dictate terms, she snapped. You married into this family. I smiled to myself. No, I replied. I married a man, and he failed. That did it. You are unwell, she said coldly. This behavior proves it. I'm documented, I corrected. There's a difference. My husband laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. You think paperwork protects you? He said. You don't understand how this works. I understand exactly how it works, I replied. You're here because you've lost leverage, and you don't know how to operate without it. A pause. Then his voice dropped. Dangerous now. You're making a mistake. I stepped closer to the door, lowering my voice deliberately. No, I said. I survived one. That silence lasted longer. Finally, footsteps retreated. Not defeated, repositioning. When the sound faded completely, I let out a slow breath and turned back to the room. They're going to try something public next, he said. I know, I replied. They need witnesses. And humiliation, he added. That's their currency. I nodded. Then we let them spend it. That evening, the article appeared. Not a real one. A local blog, poorly sourced, heavily insinuated, expectant mother flees marital home amid mental health concerns. No names, no facts, just enough detail to bruise. I read it once, then I closed the tab. They want me to panic, I said, to issue statements, to deny. They want you reactive, he agreed. I stood and walked to the window. No, I said quietly. I'll be surgical. The response went out the next morning. Not to the blog, to their employers, their board contacts, their professional circles, a calm, factual summary, supporting evidence attached, no accusations, just timelines. By afternoon, the blog post was gone. By evening, my husband's phone was ringing nonstop. I didn't answer when he called this time. I didn't need to, because now they understood something essential. I wasn't defending myself. I was mapping them. And once you know where someone's pressure points are, you don't have to raise your voice. You just have to press. Slowly. They didn't come back to the door. That told me everything. People who believe in their own authority always try twice. The first time to intimidate, the second time to reassert dominance. When they stop after one attempt, it means they're regrouping, quietly, strategically, and with fear gnawing at the edges. Fear makes people sloppy. The next move didn't come from them directly. It came from the system they'd always trusted to bend in their favor. A court notice, a scheduled evaluation, a polite envelope with sharp teeth, psychological assessment, requested on the grounds of erratic behavior and sudden detachment from marital support structures. I read it slowly, then once more. I felt nothing. They're trying to brand you, he said, watching my face carefully. Once that label sticks, everything else gets easier for them. For them, I agreed. Not for me. You don't have to consent, he added. I will, I said immediately. He frowned. You're sure? Yes, I replied, because sane people don't fear scrutiny. Liars do. The assessment center was sterile, neutral colors, smiling staff trained to notice everything. I sat upright, hands folded, posture relaxed but alert. I didn't perform calm. I was calm. The evaluator asked about my marriage. I answered with timelines. She asked about the night I left. I described weather patterns, timestamps, documented messages. She asked how I felt about my husband. I feel finished, I said. That's not anger. That's completion. She paused at that. She asked if I was afraid. Yes, I said, but fear doesn't dictate my behavior. It informs it. She asked about my support system. I listed names, roles, boundaries. She asked if I felt vindictive. No, I said. I feel responsible. There's a difference. 2 hours later, she closed her notebook. You're very composed, she observed. I had to learn, I replied. Chaos was encouraged in my marriage. Clarity was punished. Her pen stopped moving. When I left, I already knew how this would go. The report came back clean, thorough. Uninteresting, which was devastating for them. The escalation after that was pure desperation. My husband tried contrition next. Voicemails, apologies that never quite touched accountability, promises that sounded like negotiations. He talked about therapy, about change, about us. I deleted them without listening all the way through. His mother tried morality, emails about forgiveness, about family unity, about how strong women don't tear homes apart. I archived them. Then came the final tactic, urgency. A sudden health scare, a claim of stress-induced collapse, a plea for compassion. I listened to that one, not because I believed it, because I wanted to hear how low they were willing to go. You don't want this on your conscience, she said over the phone, her voice thin and trembling. He's under so much pressure. This could end very badly. I stared out at the water as she spoke. "You're right," I said calmly. "It could have ended badly." She exhaled in relief. Too soon. "But it didn't," I continued, "because I left." Her breath hitched. "You're confusing mercy with access," I said. "You no longer have the latter." Then I ended the call. That night, I sat alone in the quiet. No adrenaline, no triumph, just steadiness. I realized something then, something important. They weren't dangerous anymore. They were predictable. And predictability is what allows justice to arrive slowly, cleanly, without spectacle. I rested both hands on my belly. "I'm not teaching you how to be cruel," I whispered. "I'm teaching you how to be precise." Outside, the sky was clear. No storm, no thunder, just the deep, patient silence that comes right before something irreversible finally locks into place. The shift came quietly. No calls, no messages, no threats dressed up as concern. Silence again, but this time, it wasn't a tactic. It was containment. "They're being advised," he said one morning, scanning his screen. "Not well, but urgently." I poured tea and sat across from him. Meaning someone finally told them to stop talking? I nodded. That's usually when people realize they're not the smartest ones in the room. The legal calendar began to fill. Motions, responses, requests that tried to look routine but arrived just a little too fast. They were rushing. Rushing is always a tell. My husband's filing strategy shifted subtly. Less aggression, more protection. He wanted guardrails now. Wanted to make sure nothing else slipped through his fingers. That told me he was scared. Not of losing me, of losing control of the story. Then came the financial audit. Not court-ordered. External. Triggered quietly by the correspondence we'd sent weeks earlier. The one I'd framed as clarification, not accusation. I hadn't followed up. I hadn't pushed. I had simply let the information sit where it could be discovered. The audit request landed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my mother-in-law called again. This time she didn't sound composed. "This is unnecessary," she said sharply. "You've made your point." I smiled faintly. "I haven't made a point. I've made things accurate." "You're risking reputations," she hissed. "No," I said. "I'm letting them align with reality." "You think you're untouchable now," she snapped. I paused. "No," I said carefully. "I think I'm finished being touchable by you." Her voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. "You don't know what you're doing." I leaned back in my chair. "I know exactly what I'm doing, and so do the auditors." She hung up on me. That was new. By the end of the week, my husband's attorney withdrew. Officially, conflict of interest. Unofficially, self-preservation. My husband called me 20 minutes later, not shouting, not pleading, bargaining. "Tell them to stop," he said. "This has gone too far." I waited a beat. "Do you remember the rain?" I asked. "What?" "The night you locked me out," I continued. "Do you remember how cold it was?" Silence. "You told me to think about what I'd done," I said. "I did." He swallowed audibly. "And now you're being asked to think," I finished. "This is what that looks like." "You're punishing me," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm letting consequences finish the sentence you started." The call ended without resolution. After that, things accelerated. Accounts flagged, transactions questioned, a formal request for explanation issued to his mother's office. Her power had always lived in opacity. Light does terrible things to people like that. That night, I felt the baby settle low, heavy, grounding, present. Change was coming. Not metaphorical change, physical, irreversible. "You're close," he said quietly, watching me move slower now. "Yes," I said, "in every way." I stood at the window later, looking out at the dark water. No storm, no thunder, just depth. They thought justice would come like a crash. They were wrong. Justice was arriving like a tide, unstoppable, unemotional, taking back exactly what had been claimed too easily, and they were finally starting to understand. You don't outrun something that moves this slowly, you drown in it. Labor didn't begin with drama. No sudden pain, no cinematic rush, just a low, steady pressure that made itself known the same way truth does, without asking permission. I knew immediately, not because of instinct, because my body had finally aligned with my decisions. He noticed before I said anything. The way my breathing changed, the way I stopped mid-step and closed my eyes. Not in fear, but calculation. "It's time," he said. "Yes," I replied, "but not yet." I finished my tea first. That mattered to me, ending one thing cleanly before beginning another. We left an hour later. The hospital was quiet when we arrived. Early morning stillness, the kind that strips events down to their essentials. No spectators, no chaos, just fluorescent light and practiced hands. I signed my name without hesitation. My name, not his, not theirs. The contractions built slowly, purposefully. Each one heavier than the last, but never overwhelming. Pain came, but it didn't own me. I stayed present, alert, grounded. The nurse commented on my calm. "You're very composed," she said. I looked at her. I've been through worse. Hours passed. Between contractions, my phone buzzed once, a message from my husband. "Please, we can still fix this." I didn't respond. Another contraction followed. Stronger, closer. I welcomed it. That was when the call came from his mother. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and pushed it away. This moment was not theirs. When the baby finally arrived, it happened quickly. No complications, no hesitation. A single sharp cry filled the room. Angry, alive, unmistakably here. They placed the baby on my chest, warm and heavy and real. I looked down, and something inside me locked into place. This was not a continuation. This was a beginning. Later, when the room had quieted and the paperwork was complete, a nurse handed me a final form. "Father's information?" she asked gently. I didn't hesitate. "No." She nodded. Didn't push. Just moved on. That mattered too. The call from the court came that afternoon. Emergency motions denied. Financial freezes upheld. A temporary order issued. In my favor. I listened calmly, thanked them, and ended the call. Then I held my child closer. "You don't belong to a legacy of control," I whispered. "You belong to clarity." That evening, as dusk filtered through the hospital blinds, he stood by the window while I rested. "They've lost standing," he said quietly. "Both of them." I nodded. "They lost it the night they locked the door." My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number. "You've made yourself an enemy." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I typed back one sentence. "No." I named mine. I turned the phone off completely after that, because the final phase had begun. And this part required silence. Not fear, not anger, focus. They thought the story ended when the baby arrived. They were wrong. This was just the moment the stakes became permanent. Because nothing terrifies people who crave control more than realizing they no longer have access to the future. They moved fast after the birth. Not because they cared, but because time had finally turned against them. The first sign was procedural. Quiet, almost polite. A filing error corrected too quickly. A hearing rescheduled for efficiency. A sudden willingness to negotiate from people who had spent years refusing to listen. That's how you know power has shifted. Not when they shout, when they soften. I was home by then. The baby slept in a bassinet beside the window, chest rising and falling with calm authority, like someone who had arrived knowing they belonged. I moved slowly, not weak, intentional. Every step measured, every decision final. "They want mediation," he said, reading from his screen. I didn't look up. "They want control." "Yes," he agreed. "They think compromise will get it back." I adjusted the blanket over my child. It won't. The mediation request came with conditions: privacy, non-disclosure, a desire to resolve matters quietly. That part almost made me laugh. Quiet was their favorite environment. Quiet is where they thrived, where manipulation could pretend to be misunderstanding. I declined. Not emotionally, formally, in writing, with reason. I didn't accuse, I didn't threaten, I documented. I outlined the timeline, I referenced filings, I attached outcomes. Then I ended with one sentence: future communication will proceed only through court. The response came hours later. Anger stripped of polish, threats thinly veiled as warnings, predictions of regret. I didn't read them twice. By the end of the week, the final hearings began. No drama, no spectacle, no audience, just records, patterns, consequences. I testified once, briefly, clearly. I described the marriage without adjectives. I described the night without embellishment. I described the aftermath without accusation. I didn't cry. I didn't perform strength. I told the truth like someone who no longer needed it to be received kindly. My husband tried to speak after me. He talked about stress, about pressure, about misunderstandings. He never once mentioned the rain. That omission mattered. His mother spoke last, controlled, measured, certain the room still bent toward her. It didn't. The judgment came down 2 weeks later. Full financial separation, protective custody, no contact outside formal channels. Permanent records entered. Not punishment, recognition. That night, after the baby was asleep and the house finally settled into itself, I stood alone in the quiet. No storm, no thunder, just me. I thought back to that night on the steps, the cold stone, the locked door, the silhouettes watching without moving. They had believed power lived behind glass. They were wrong. Power lives in the moment you stop asking to be let in. I didn't take revenge. I didn't need to. I took something far more permanent. My name, my future, my child's inheritance of truth. They thought throwing me into the storm would erase me. What it did instead was teach me how weather works, pressure, timing, release, and lightning. Lightning doesn't strike because it's angry. It strikes because the conditions are finally right. I turned off the light and went to bed. The rain never came again. But even if it had, I knew exactly what to do with it.